Good evening and Happy New Year. A very warm welcome to all of you. And we at the Observer Research Foundation are particularly happy to be beginning the new year with this offering today by Dr. Jaishankar. This is, as you all know, and many of us would have attended the first launch we did in September 2020. This is the second book. And the first book, The India Way, had offered a kind of a concise prognosis of the country, that is India, that is Bharat, its strategic aims, its choices, its approaches in a multipolar world order, and the book busted all the charts. It's still flying off the shelves. This one, I can assure you, promises to do much better. And that is because, why Bharat matters is perhaps an even better timed work narrating the journey of the country's emergence on the international stage as a confident nation, forging its own path and fully determined to shape the choices that it makes. And it comes from a person who actually has been responsible, has had the shaping, guiding hand, and the voice articulating it so many times on the national and the international stage about this global engagement. First, I would say for the past decade, first as Foreign Secretary and then as the External Affairs Minister. But more importantly, this book comes in the backdrop of three significant developments we are seeing all around us. One, we find ourselves not only in an increasingly turbulent world, but a more confused and unpredictable world at that. A world where in the midst of disruptive geopolitical realignments, our common future is in real danger of losing its moral compass. A situation in which new actors, including many marginalized voices from the global south, have begun questioning the formats, interrogating the terms of engagement that may have held sway in the past, but do not seem to be working very well right now. Secondly, 2024, this particular year, is going to be a year of political churn across, which is going to involve 50% of the world's population. 64 countries are going through an electoral process, and this does not include the EU. Now, these elections are taking place in a geopolitically fragmented, disjointed world. And yet, at the same time, this is one world in which many ordinary people, common people, groups are knit together by technology and connected like no other time in history. So for good or for bad, all kinds of transnational actors join in what were essentially in the past domestic exercises. So 2024 can expectedly be the year when not just the electoral outcomes, but the very course of these elections can influence the course of many of the conflicts and alignments that we see around us in the world today. And given where Bharat is positioned upon the global stage, we can be sure Indian elections are going to be closely watched by everybody. So the choices made by this electorate, made by 1.4 billion people, how they assess their future will matter not just within our shores, but to many around the world. Third and last, we are entering the critical years forward, achieving what the Prime Minister has called the Amrit Kal, which is primarily Viksit Bharat, a nation fully developed. The goal sets us on the path of not just economic growth, but also holistic transformation of lives, livelihoods, and here, our foreign policy, our international partnerships for the next few years will be of immense consequence to this process. So it is against this backdrop that the themes that Dr. Jaishankar engages with in this book provide the grounding for the ideas and the ideals that will shape India's choices. Ultimately, Bharat is a civilizational power, has been a civilizational power. It has a rich and powerful heritage that will remain its compass into the future. No doubt how Bharat engages with the powers and forces in its neighborhood, and not just its neighborhood, but far beyond, and secures its global interests, how it displays its economic heft, economic statecraft going into the future. This will in many ways mirror and be mirrored in the internal debates regarding the present times, the past times, and the time's future that are contained in the time past. So therefore, the book places key aspects of India's contemporary foreign policy and its global engagement in the context of this rich heritage, drawing upon learnings from its living texts. These are living texts which people breathe every day today. The Ramayana, to tell us how the civilizational aspect of Bharat can help navigate the complex and uncertain geopolitical landscape we find ourselves in today. How it would play a salient role in tackling pressing global challenges like climate change, sustainable goals, and help strengthen and preserve the multipolar global order, in which providing and sustaining global public goods remains a moral and not just a strategic choice. So you can be certain that this is a book which promises to be a fascinating read, even more fascinating, as I said, than the first book, and it offers us a template to assess India's external engagement by looking at its rich past. So thank you all for joining us this evening for our first, as I said, public offering in 2024. And with that, I would say that the year could not have started off better. With this, I hand over, and I would like to join all of you in listening to, straight from the author, what we have to learn about his insights into this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joshi. If I could now invite Mr. Kapish Mehra, Managing Director, Rupa Publications in India, to deliver the publisher's remark. Mr. Mehra, over to you.
First of all, big thank you to Mr. Joshi. Before we get into the formalities of good evening, because publishers by nature are very competitive. And the very fact that you confirmed that our book is better than the previous one of Dr. Jaishankar, published by somebody else, that does it for me in the evening. A very good evening to our author, Dr. Jaishankar, ma'am, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you, Samir. Whenever there is a shortage of funds, always rely on Samir. So, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my job as a publisher should normally be to talk to you about the book and, what's in it and the various chapters and the fact that it's one of the best books ever written, etc., etc. I don't think that's what you're here for, to hear from me at least. And I think there are some aspects of today's evening which kind of sums up a lot about what is going to follow. While the title may be Why Bharat Matters, the nature of today's evening, a packed house, lots of media, lots of speculation, actually puts out another title, which should be Why S. Jaishankar Matters. And sir, many congratulations. This book, this audience, and the nature of the news that has preceded the book launch indicates exactly what I just mentioned. It is often that publishers dream of a book that happens to become a bestseller before an official release function. It does happen once in a while that some books, because of controversial reasons, tends to pick up public imagination and therefore climb the charts of different e-commerce portals. But there are very few books, at least that's, that I can remember of, which climb charts of e-commerce websites, happen to become #1 on that website, become the biggest bestseller of that website for that day, strictly on the basis of the content and the personality of the author. Why Bharat Matters is exactly that. So, sir, many congratulations that on the release date, we are not only a bestseller, but we are also #1 across the country on all portals. It is a lovely problem to have when you have few copies and lots of orders. As publishers, we tend to do book launches 1 a week. So this is the usual practice. Normally, there are books which are stored outside the venue, the author is happy to sign, etc., etc. But there is very rarely an occasion when there is a help from the office standing outside diligently and, in the cold, waiting for the author to arrive, not because the author is important, but because there is a box of signed books in the trunk of his car, which needs to be there at the venue in time, which is even more important. Such is the pull and the fan flavor that this audience has towards Jaishankar ji. And I'm delighted that we've had this opportunity to publish him. One does have a privilege of interacting with a lot of people when you publish books, different types, some very busy, some not so busy, and some who are busy all the time. I don't have to tell you which category Dr. Jaishankar fits in. But it is very, very rare, and I say this with all honesty, even though I'm going to pitch for the next book, I say this with all honesty, that Dr. Jaishankar is a unique author. It is probably easy to write a book. It's probably a little more difficult to write a good book, but it's very difficult, ladies and gentlemen, to rewrite a good book. And I can say from experience that during the course of the many interactions that one has had the privilege of having with the Honorable Minister, he has worked diligently on the book and taken in every feedback that made sense and incorporated it and turned it around. No wonder our foreign policy is in good hands with the kind of the dotting of the I's and the crossing of the T's that he put in action with regards to the book. And on a lighter note, sir is somebody who chooses the title or the title chooses him, I don't know. While coming to the book launch, I was thinking about the various times sir has called me. And it has so happened that I made a list of all the times that he's called me, and I listed down the countries I was traveling in. And there are probably 17 countries, sir, that I was in at different times of GMT, where I've received a call asking about a question, about a book, about the manuscript, and taking an immediate answer and incorporating it. And maybe that's why the title, Why Bharat Matters, because it's everywhere, all the time, and I think you're the best flag bearer of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mehra, for your remarks, and many congratulations to you as well, given the bestseller status that the book has already got. If I could now request, before I invite Dr. Jaishankar on stage, if I could request my colleagues to play a short video introducing Why Bharat Matters. If I can now invite Dr. S. Jaishankar, Minister for External Affairs, India, and the author of the book, Why Bharat Matters, to the podium to deliver the author's remarks. Sir.
Thank you. After that build-up, I think the book better be good. So, but really, Sanjay, Samir, Kapish, thank you so much for organizing this evening. I'd like to say a few words about why I wrote the book and then tell you what's in the book. In a way, after the last book, I got a lot of feedback, reactions, advice, second guesses, and I felt I should do something with it. Even the idea this time of using the epic Ramayana as the overarching perspective through which I look at the world was actually something I got in the course of a meeting as a suggestion, almost a challenge from somebody. Of course, as Kapish was mentioning, I formatted it from a suggestion that he gave me, and I'll talk about that. So, what is the book about, really? The book is a perspective of someone like me, involved every day, every hour in foreign policy, who has actually witnessed a decade of very significant change, I would say transformation of India's foreign policy, and who feels compelled in a sense to share that narrative, because unless you've been in the room, part of the process, because so much has changed, it's not something which is readily I won't say comprehensible, but readily, in a sense, grasped by everybody else. So that is really, in a sense, what drove me to this particular effort. And in a way, I begin by describing the world as I see it, a world of globalization, of rebalancing, of multipolarity, one where the impact of technology is sharper and deeper with each passing day. But all this is set against the competitiveness of international relations, the games nations play, which perennially continues. Now, all of this is happening. These are trends unfolding over multiple years, decades in a way. When we have, in these last 5 years, a set of shocks. These include, most of all, the COVID, what happened in Afghanistan, what continues to happen in Ukraine, what has recently happened in West Asia, in the Middle East, and of course what is happening to the planet in terms of the climate disruptions. Because the climate disruptions have a real impact, again, on the economy and will have increasingly, in a way, on global politics as well. Now, my argument in the book is keeping all of this, particularly the COVID experience, in mind. There is a very strong case for re-globalization. I'm very conscious that globalization is for real, it's irreversible, but that globalization in many ways today have evoked very sharp awareness about the need for strategic autonomy in many countries. Strategic autonomy was a particularly favorite phrase in India, but I think today you will hear it in many other geographies, including Europe. And that this re-globalization can be done by building more reliable, resilient supply chains, by addressing the digital domain in a more transparent and trusted manner, by de-risking the over-concentrations that have emerged in the last 2 or 3 decades by creating more engines of growth. My point is really that economic choices cannot be divorced from the strategic context. Now, in all of this, there is one particularly, I would say, significant aspect for India itself, which is the global workplace. That in the last 10 years, there's been a profound change in the global workplace, and India today, with greater skills and greater mobility, has a very special contribution to make to that. Now, all of you are familiar with the drive for Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, over the last decade. But my contention is to realize an Atmanirbhar Bharat, it is first of all important to be Bharat. That, unless we are clear who we are, where we are coming from, we will never be clear about where we are going. And that is, in a sense, the underlying message of my book. And again, in terms of policy options today, we are seeking to board the manufacturing bus, which we have missed a few times before. We are particularly focused on sensitive sectors, sensitive both from an economic viewpoint, but from a security viewpoint. We look at the transformational aspects of digital delivery and the examples that it holds for the world. We are, as I said, very much also, in a sense, promoting our heritage and culture, because in many ways we see that as something which shapes our identity. And as Sanjay mentioned, if we look upon ourselves and the world looks upon us as a civilizational power, it's something which is very important that we do. Now, the last 10 years, where I have largely served in the government, have been truly transformational. And I bring out in a kind of a descriptive account what those transformations have been. There have been, of course, within that transformation, some inflection points, I would say, some particular moments of salience. I would describe the Article 370 decision as one of them. I think what has changed on our borders with China is another. The whole neighborhood. In fact, I tried to explain that there's really a new construct of foreign policy that has come into making. And of course, since I am in politics, and many of you certainly follow politics, we also are experiencing in many ways the attacks from beyond our borders, which are often ideological and agenda driven. So how I have presented this book is, I have tried to first explain the global landscape, and then I have tried also to make the average person, the average reader, understand why foreign policy is important to them personally. That it's not something that you watch on the YouTube, or you follow the news, or you pick up a nice book like this one. It is something which impacts your well-being, sometimes your existence. We saw that during COVID, not just the manner in which COVID came, but also the remedies and the mitigation that we had to go around the world, and which we also contributed to the rest of the world. We have seen it in different operations that we've had to do. I mean, if you look at the last 10 years, there's been almost every year a significant operation where India has committed its resources. And we see it in very practical choices we make. Choices which will determine what is the price of fuel, or the price of food, or the price of fertilizer in this country. Now, it's very clear that the world is unsettled. You saw that very graphic picture of that. There's a more wordy description in one of my chapters. And then I, of course, spell out the changes of the last decade. What has particularly, where has Indian foreign policy changed? Why has it changed? What are the thought processes behind that? In that sense, really, what is the impact which Prime Minister Modi has made on foreign policy? And then I developed that into where we are a decade later. And where we are, in a sense, is the quest to be a Vishwamitra, a friend of the world. Different people have given it different descriptions. So somebody called it multi-vector, multi-alignment. But I would say the idea is really to have the maximum goodwill and the minimum adversaries. So how have we progressed in that regard? Because that, in many ways, is the fundamental quest that we have in foreign policy. There are two subjects to which I have devoted special attention in the book. One is the Quad, because I've had a personal association with it from the first time, and then at every stage of the second and more successful endeavor. And the other one is our relations with China. Then I have explored somewhat, I would say, unconventional areas. One, the idea that we need to reimagine security, that today what we may consider to be normal, because we live in an interdependent, interpenetrable world, what we consider to be normal may actually be a security concern as well. And of course, I've also tried to, I indulged myself by exploring some what-ifs, that what if our history had not gone that way, but we had explored some other choices at a time when those choices were actually being debated. And I have picked 4 people in Indian history to whose views I have tried to distill and put forward, and those 4 are Sardar Patel, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and Minu Masani. And what they had to say on 3 very critical relationships in our early years, the relationship with Pakistan, with China, and with the United States. So what if some of those thoughts had actually become policy in that era? And finally, of course, I come to how Bharat is today impacting the world. Examples being vaccine Maitri, the fact that we gave vaccines to almost 100 countries, the voice of the global south, the manner in which G20 was conducted, the independent stance we have taken on many geopolitical issues, and in many ways I would say the relevance that we have for other countries, for example, on an issue like digital public infrastructure. Now, I have examined all of this through the lens of an epic. And the reason I picked that epic was it is actually an epic of an era of high standards, where phrases that we use today, rules-based order, rule of law, these phrases were actually believed and practiced in that era. So it's a conscious attempt to be non-cynical about international relations. Now, I accept that even those with a higher purpose had to understand and practice statecraft, but the message, the subtext of what I was trying to do is to make those who practice statecraft also believe there's a higher purpose. So what I did was I took the epic Ramayana and really, shall I say, tried to make it contemporary. That if you look today at diplomats, that there are great diplomats in Ramayana. Now everybody knows about Hanuman, but there was another monkey prince called Angad, or his mother Tara. Now each one of them in a way made a diplomatic contribution. Or the idea of a rising power, that how does a rising power deal with an entrenched power? And Ramayana also contains the story of 2 sages one of whom is entrenched, accepted, and one of whom is trying to prove himself. Or the idea of allies, of reliability. And, in India, we actually use a twin term. We say Ram Lakshman, that's his sibling. It's his half brother, actually. And the idea that, two brothers who are so close. So my point is that every Ram requires a Lakshman, that countries are better served if you have reliable friends and allies who can temper you down when you need to be, who can strengthen you when you are down. The importance of alliance. Or the opposite, the power of suspicion, that, a lot of the problems in the Ramayana arise from the suspicion that Ram's stepmother has and about her son's prospects. The idea of being tested, which again a rising power has to go through, and Ram himself is tested. Or the fact that coalition building, how difficult coalition building has to be. And that is something which, Ram does, which is he actually makes an extra effort to bring in this case, for example, Angad, whose father he has just slain. But he has tried to build him into a coalition because he understands why a coalition is important. In fact, even the idea of regime change, that by intervening in a conflict between two monkey kings, Lord Ram actually induces regime change. The fact that countries have recurring threats, or the fact that some countries can actually build up other countries or other powers and sometimes regret it. And in this case, of course, Ram's father gave his wife 2 boons and never thinking that she would invoke it in the manner in which. So there's a lot out there. I felt the deeper I got into it, I felt actually that we sometimes tend to underestimate inherited wisdom. Certainly when we are thinking of a civilizational power, contemplating a civilizational power in the process of rise, contemplating a very unpredictable world out there, to me, actually, it seemed not that different from how Lord Ram would have looked at his times. So those were some of the thoughts I had, which I have tried to put in a book. I really, again, thank you all for coming here today. Certainly, like the last book, I look forward to your reactions. Thank you very much.
So, before we begin, I must tell you that Kapish has an easy job of publishing you. We have the difficult job of hosting you for the launch. In 3 days, we had 2,500 registrations, and we have to choose 300. So I have 2,200 angry people right now. And I'm reading the pages of Ramayana to help me deal with this right now. I'm just telling you. So, I must also apologize to those who could not join us, and I'm sure we will find ways of engaging all of you in our future activities. What we were able to do is bring together at least 100 students into this room. I think that's important, that foreign policy for you, the chapter that you wrote, which is, I think, something that you want to, you attempt to broad-based discussions on foreign policy with the young people and with people who generally do not engage with these matters. So we made an effort to bring them into this room and they could participate in this discussion. So that's my apologies, and thank you for joining us. I really enjoyed the book. I got an early copy. That's the advantage of hosting the book launch. I had a copy quite early, and I was able to read it. And I was reliving the conversations I would have with my grandmother in the kitchen about Ramayana. And it's true, you know, it's an epic that all of us have, as children, grown up with. And we were sometimes cajoled to behave well based on what was written in the book, sometimes admonished because it was against the principles that were espoused. And this was really something that had never been presented in a manner that deals with contemporary politics. So thank you for doing this. And I think this is important, that we visualize the challenges of today in the grammar of our own histories, rather than in languages that differ. So let me quickly jump into the book, sir, and ask you first a question that, you have actually, you said something very interesting, 2 points. One, you said testing. All powers have to be tested. There are moments when they emerge. With Lord Ram, you could possibly describe the stringing of the bow as one of his moments of arrival. Is that moment of stringing of the bow for India behind us, ahead of us? Are we in that moment? Have we strung the bow? Let me ask you that question.
I think my sense is we are at that inflection point. We may be stringing it or just finished stringing it. And I'll tell you why I would say that. I mean, first of all, in the book itself, I've actually said there could be, it's not a single act. There are even Rama was tested
Multiple times.
Multiple times. Okay. I mean, he strung the bow. He
then the Parshuram.
Yeah. Then he met an adversary, he bested him. So there's a story there. In our case, I think there's a series of steps. If we look back at our own history, some of it is economic, some of it is political. I would say the nuclear exercise of the nuclear option would be one. The reframing of the subcontinent, Bangladesh. But to me, the last 10 years, and especially the last 5 years, because to come through COVID, there's one experience on COVID I would never forget, which is we had this G20 virtual conference, and the head of the World Bank was briefing us about how, what we could expect. And to be, I don't remember his exact words, but the bottom line of that briefing was, India is going to be the big problem. That if there is any part of the world which is going to buckle under COVID, it's actually going to be India. Now, when I looked through that COVID experience, and I was very deeply involved in that, and watched how we came through it, and today when I look at where we are not, I mean, one part of it is 7.7 growth rate, but look at the rest of the transformation which is taking place. And I would say this especially to the students, we should not and cannot really divorce what is happening at home with our prospects outside. They are very, very deeply interlinked. So I think we have strung the bow or are pretty close to that
Moment.
Process, yes.
The second idea that you, in a sense, evoked in me when you were delivering your remarks on the book was on the Quad, and on perhaps Lord Rama's effort through the epic of building coalitions in some sense, from the Monkey Kings and the Monkey Kingdom to specialists either on on building bridges and creating infrastructure, or even for medical assistance at some point of time. He put together an arsenal of allies, right?
Preachers, yes,
right?
Yes.
Now, if you were to replace them, or if they denote countries or power centers, as it were, or knowledge centers, as it were, in Quad, what do those four represent? In some sense, and when you suddenly also start attending the SCO meeting and the BRICS meeting, so what is this coalition building that is happening? That you mentioned Quad, but there is also an SCO, there is also a BRICS, there is also an IPSA. What is this exercise underway in a larger context?
I in the direct analogy I make to the Quad is in the fact that the four sons of Dashrath, Rama, Bharat, Lakshman and Shatrughan, who in many ways have competitive interests. I mean, Rama has been exiled, so there is this gathering in the forest where the two brothers who've gone into exile are meeting the other two who have come from the capital. And Hunter King, who's observing them, actually marvels at the fact that though in a way they are competitive, yet there is something fundamental about them which brings them together. When they meet and sit down, suddenly everything starts to work. That's the Quad analogy that I have brought. But the fact is that, almost every analogy I would urge you not to take literally. Okay. I mean, I'm pointing to them in a way conceptually. I would shift your question really more towards the Vishwamitra direction. And the idea that, look, unless you have a broad, the broader your connections. Now, obviously, all relationships are not going to be the same. You know, there will be countries or people or figures who would be closer because you share interests, you have common way of looking at things. There are other convergences, but that should not lead us necessarily to neglect, you know, or in some way alienate others. So again, I put it to you, I would give you a Ramayana analogy here, which is after having slain Vali, you know, Lord Ram actually makes a special effort to reach out to his son Angad. Yeah. So you know, the idea is why create problems when you don't need to? In fact, if you make an effort, you mitigate or you obviate or you solve a problem. So to me, it's an interesting exercise of diplomacy where you don't start with strong preconceived likes and dislikes. You try to create as broad a sort of landscape for yourself as possible. But within that, there will be priorities.
You know, when I was preparing for this conversation, one of your old colleagues from university times, who shall not be named, told me that, and he calls you by your first name, Jay. He says, I think Jay is getting old. You know, this is, no, he's getting soft. He's getting soft. He was a realist, hard-nosed, realpolitik guy. He was the Mahabharata type. And he's now talking about norms and values, and he's sounding European.
I'm truly delighted that when you use Ramayana, you are taken as a European. That means it's working.
No. On a more serious note, so, you know, the normative foundations of managing complex times, and that is, I think, Ramayana in many ways, the epic that conveys to us means and methods and experiences of people. How do you reconcile some of the more clever ways of managing times that Mahabharata may have constructed in its relay versus a more principled approach that Ramayana espouses? I would call one is the treatise of living a higher life, and one is on negotiating life. How do these converge? Do they converge, or do they need to converge?
You know, let me give you a very practical example which happened twice this year, which is the Voice of the Global South. Now, for many countries, you know, they were not even expecting vaccines from us during the COVID year. So, doing good, doing the right thing is actually, even if one looks at it very transactionally, is actually very rewarding.
It's a strategic positive.
Well, yes, that's one way of putting it. You know, again, my point is this. I don't think a power like India, that too one which has a civilizational aspect to it, I don't think it suits our interest to be defined in a very, shall I say, utilitarian and transactional manner. And therefore, while I'm not, again, I have pointed out that, you know, there are a lot of statecraft aspects of what Rama does at various points of time, sometimes against the advice of people around him. But these are calls. So,
and he also takes liberties with some of the principles as well. For example, in his intervention, you mentioned the conflict between the brothers. Or perhaps,
you know, so that's my point. Look, we can look at it this way. Either your SOP is a good one and you have
flexibilities and
deviations, or your SOP is a fundamentally cynical one and you happen to slip into good moments. Now tell me which one would you like? I would say reputationally I would rather have the first.
The first.
Because when I make deviations, if I'm otherwise a good guy and I make deviations, people will say, look, it's an exceptional situation, that's why they're deviating. Otherwise they are very, they're very principled people. So I would say principles have a great utility.
That's why I like the Europeans. They deviate a lot, but principally they're good people. That's my conclusion of this. Sorry. Now, there was an economic message, right through the book. In fact, you start pretty much with the whole conception of being contributors to the common good, global public goods, in fact, is something that you have highlighted as delivering public goods to people around the world. You've also mentioned about the de-risking and the supply chains and a whole complex range of economic challenges that we all have to engage with today. The Americans call it the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a very nationalist economic version. I think the Europeans are coming out with a carbon border adjustment mechanism under the garb of doing good for the planet. It's also a very strong, robust national policy. Are you suggesting in the book that we are going to see more nationalist, muscular economic policies, or are you, by the in the same writing, you are also talking about an enlargement of partnerships so that we could create trust, transparency, we could create diversification, decentralization? I think the word you've used is decentralization. How does it work together? Muscular national policies of, say, the American variety and the nimble-footedness that perhaps you have argued for in the book.
Your first point that doing global good. In fact, Lord Ram does a lot of global good. It's actually his global good which makes him go into forests and defend sages who are, praying from evil forces. So there is a lot to be said for global good. Again, as I said, a rising civilizational power also needs to build its reputation. Now, regarding the economic message, the belief which I have tried to express and articulate in the book is that we actually were not sufficiently sweeping in our reforms in the first 2 decades of reform. That it started as a response to a crisis, but we did not then get into doing other reforms which would build deeper national strengths. And that actually has cost us in many ways. And a lot of that is because we kind of fell for the mantra of globalization, where we actually didn't benefit as much relatively as those who dominated production and those who dominated finance did. But today, the world's a very different place. That today, particularly post-COVID, but also because there is great power, competition and suspicion, that we are looking at the common talk is of more reliable, resilient supply chains. That if you look anything in the data or the digital domain, people say, I need a trusted vendor, I need a trusted partner, I need trusted cross-border flows. So this narrative today, I think, offers us another chance of doing things which we missed out.
We missed the bus last time.
But we can't do it, or we will be unable to do it, unless we had done many of the changes at home which are required for us to do it. And a lot of what actually has happened in the last 10 years in India, if you look, for example, at different programs, these schemes and campaigns, if you actually connect those dots, what the Modi government is trying to do is actually prepare the domestic, the society for those big changes so that we can take advantage of it. So if there is today an Apple production in India, if we are able to deploy our own 5G stack, if we are able to go to the moon in manner in which we did, if we could actually produce vaccines with the kind of accuracy, integrity on that mass scale which we did, I think all these are symptomatic of what is happening. But to me, the big opportunity, apart from getting into supply chains and into digital flows, is actually the global workplace. I think there's a big global workplace out there. 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago, we were chasing the world saying, you know, you are being very tough on Indians where visas are concerned. Okay? Today, actually, there are a range of countries which are pursuing us saying, let's figure out a way of workplace mobility. And if I were to say, even the last 2 or 3 years, I mean, we've signed agreements with Germany, Italy, Portugal.
I mean, that's a permanent agenda point in your travels, mobility agreement. I've noticed it in your travels.
Other than my own mobility, yes.
Okay. Now, you know, internal constraints. Something again you have touched upon in the writings, and I think the stepmother Kekai, stepmother of Lord Rama, and her invocation of the boon offered to her by her husband, and in many ways the epic begins with her trying to protect the son's interest. No, that's one form of internal constraint, internal challenge to the journey that nations will probably undertake. But you also see in the book that not all good guys, and you could argue that some of the people that Ram had to, or that the Lord Rama was challenged by, were not necessarily bad guys, typically bad guys, right? Including we spoke about Parshuram, for example, right? Even external pivots from not necessarily bad actors challenge the progress. So you had internal constraints on the one hand, the mother herself protecting her own narrow interests, and of course external actors challenging your eyes. India, where it stands today, Bharat as it emerges, where do you think these two facets are going to emerge? Do you have a sense of what could be those internal constraints, or what could be those external actions by certain actors whom you might be today believing to be part of your positive journey ahead?
Well, yes, I think the internal constraints are pretty obvious, you know, to all of us. It would be that, let us say, after the first 60 years after independence, if you were to look at basic socio-economic indicators, how many of your homes are connected to electricity, how many to piped water, you look at your literacy rate, you look at your gender ratio, you look at your nutrition level, you look at your health system. I think it's fairly clear that in a lot of these, we had not done what we could have done, what other countries who had started off at a similar base had done. So a lot of, and you know, that's kind of at a very basic level, but beyond that is really, as I said, these deep strengths, you know. You cannot, today you have, if you want to be a major power, you have to have the technology capabilities of a major power, and you will not have the technology capabilities of major power unless you have a major manufacturing base from which that technology grows. So I would say at different levels we had fallen short, sometimes out of challenges, sometimes out of choices, sometimes out of vested interest, call it what you will. So you have this decade of transformation is not just of foreign policy, you know, smart people coming and changing foreign policy. It has changed because the country has changed. I mean, what has changed within the country today gives many more options and possibilities for us. But there is the willpower and the commitment side as well. I mean, we could, for example, have done some of the operations, the rescue operations, but by committing, say, military forces, you are doing it with a certain message, but you're also doing it with a certain efficiency and a certain resolve. That, I mean, for me, for example, Sudan was a very, very difficult operation because there was actually live fighting going on there. And in fact, you had our aircraft, some of them making truly risky landings. So I think, you know, there's a combination of changing society, building capabilities, looking at the world, setting out your course, and then having the willpower to pursue it.
You did not respond to my external constraints. Let me ask you a specific question. As India and Bharat begins to influence its own course and implicates others as well as it rises. Would you still receive the same enthusiastic welcome into this new role as we did when we were, let's say, a $1.5 trillion economy struggling to meet our literacy requirements, energy requirements, food requirements? Do you think as we grow in our essence as well as in our economic presence, you're going to face resistance even from unlikely quarters?
I would certainly say we receive more respect. Okay. All respect doesn't translate into enthusiasm.
Okay.
There will be some countries who will respect you but will be uneasy. There will be others who will respect you, genuinely admire you, and say, okay, what you have done today could be me tomorrow, or there are lessons I can learn. So, and there would be those who would say, you know, you're bigger now, you're more influential. By the way, we can have a new deal out here. We can work with each other. So if you take the world in three categories, those who would be uneasy, those who would genuinely
Admire,
feel, and those who would be willing to do more business with you, you can broadly categorize the nations
in those
of the
three
world.
categories.
Yeah.
I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you a few names and place them in those categories. I won't do that.
No.
I mean, you are actually the foreign minister, yeah. So, okay,
Thank you for reminding me.
Okay, now what ifs? I want to go to one what if, because that's in the book and perhaps you can share it with the audience. What if we had been more Bharat in, say, the period 47 to 62, the first conflict we had with China? What would be different in terms of our strategic relationships today? you mentioned, of course, China itself, but also, say, the Soviet Union or Russia today, and perhaps our presence in the neighborhood, our relationships in the neighborhoods. One what if. I won't ask you all the what ifs.
I would say regarding the three countries that I posited, Pakistan, China, US, which were actually three very debated relationships in our early years. I mean, they still are debated even now. I think if we had been more Bharat, we would have had a less rosy view of our relationship with China. That a lot of what in our, especially our first decade, I think, you know, and this is not something which is my fantasy. I mean, there is a kind of a record out there. There's an exchange of, you know, notes, letters between Sardar Patel and Pandit Nehru on China. And they have very starkly differing views about it. Or if one looks at even the whole UN Security Council issue, you know, this is not something which today someone is saying. I mean, this is a letter which Nehru has written to chief ministers saying, first let China take its place in the Security Council. Or even when actually the 1962 conflict war was taking place, where Nehru actually writes to Kennedy saying, look, I need your help, but you know, I'm not quoting his exact words, but more or less like, I was hesitating to ask you because I was not sure how it would look overall. I mean, when your country is actually under attack. So I think what happens is, in a sense, there is a certain, I would say, a kind of a left-wing ideology which was very strong in that period, which in China, and similarly, there's very ingrained hostility towards the United States. That, you know, I mean, not, mind you, the Americans did a lot to deserve it. That's a different matter. But the fact is that there were things which the Americans did which probably didn't deserve it.
So that hasn't changed about the Americans, by the way.
No, well.
I'm just kidding.
No, but you know, in fact, again, it's an interesting issue where one of the last comments of Sardar Patel on foreign policy was, you know, why are we sort of so distrustful of America? We should look at America from the viewpoint of our own interest, not from the viewpoint of how the Americans are dealing with China.
So let me extrapolate that. Had we actually engaged in the Sardar Patel template, would you be in Russia a few days ago?
I think I would have been, because to me that would have been a kind of a geopolitical balance of power
Relationship.
yeah, I mean, I tell people, look at the map of this big landmass, okay, and remember the fundamental, the basic 101 of statecraft, which is your neighbor's neighbor is your friend. I mean, it's a no-brainer. So I would have said, fine, ideology may have got in the way. In fact, it did in the initial years when Stalin was alive. But I would have said, to me, part of the reason why India...
So there is no incongruity in having a strong US relationship and a strong Russian partnership like we have today, for example, right? I mean, that would have been the template even at that particular...
Part of being Bharat is also to be clear-headed about your own interests and not being swayed by what other, the willingness to, in a sense, you want to look nice in front of other people to a point where it necessarily is not in your own interest.
So, as we become more Bharat, or as India is more Bharat, what does a young foreign services officer who joins Ministry of External Affairs today gets as his brief? Or let me just tell you, how is his life going to be different to, say, your life when we were less Bharat versus
her
now?
Life, because a very large number of them, in fact, today are women.
So their life.
It's not
their life.
their life. Yeah. So,
and congratulations on that. I mean, it's really great to see.
They are today joining diplomacy at a time when, we are approaching maybe a 4 trillion level, where our influence and presence is becoming global. Because again, that's one of the changes of the last 10 years. That if one looks today at so-called far off from India, you would see, in some form or the other, there's an Indian presence. So our footprint has increased, our weight and influence has increased. In many ways, I would say our confidence has grown. We are also, I think, culturally more authentic in a way. We are more naturally expressive of what we are. So I would say it's frankly a very different world. And it will be very different in the next 10, 15 years as well.
So you mentioned something about Hanuman at the very beginning. And on your book, actually, he plays a central role in many of the conversations that have a jump narrative between the present day and the past. Hanuman grows in confidence. And you have tried to imply there, and I may be putting words in your mouth.
No, you are right, I have.
So are you suggesting that something that may seem outrageously ambitious today may seem more normal because we have gone through the process of doing it? And are we going to see India continue to strive to do those bold, hairy, audacious, grand things in the future, because that allows them to become more normal for our conduct?
Yes, I mean, to those who are not familiar, Hanuman was in a way he was cursed to be forgetful about his own strength from things he had done early in his life.
He used to trouble the sages and the people who were doing meditation. He used to trouble them, so he was cursed to forget his own strength. Right?
So it is only as he kind of enters divine service and does more and more that he knows the full extent
of his capabilities.
I think in a way that is what is happening to us. That when we ourselves look at what seemed, impossible or unrealistic just a few years ago, today would seem very natural. I mean, we had an economic crisis in our neighborhood, and people were still debating what to do, and that economy was actually melting down by the day.
Correct.
Now, if 10 years ago, I would have said, Samir, you know, we're going to make a $4 billion intervention in the neighborhood, you would have laughed at me. And yet we've done it. And by the way, now people treat it as something, you know, which
They can count on in a bad day.
Yes, yes.
You also have, through the book, engaged with Lord Rama's brother Lakshman. And in fact, even in your opening remarks, you mentioned every Ram needs a Lakshman. He was the alter ego, he was the moderator, he was sometimes the expression of Ram's anger, he was sometimes the one who soothed frayed nerves. He played multiple roles. Of course, he was a warrior and he won key battles in the 10-day war.
Problem solver.
He was a problem, everything. He was multiple things. But he was certainly the person who was very important for that journey and the emergence of Ram. So let me ask you a question, since we are in January, the month of January. Is France Lakshman to India? I'm just asking.
Now, I have a section on France in the book, and I have many references to Lakshman. So you figure that one out.
Can't get an answer out of him, I'm telling you. I've been trying to make you say something that is not part of the brief this evening. No, sir, but on you know, just since you're talking about countries, I want to come to Vibhishan, that will be your last question before I turn it to the audience. But on countries, you spoke about the emergence of India and how it is being appreciated by 3 different sets of nations. Emergence of Bharat is something very new. You know, for example, our foreign policy and our international engagements would always be studied through the English school or the Chicago school when it comes to economic statecraft, or different Western prisms, right? Now you are explaining Indian foreign policy through our own lived experiences, our epics and our you know, and we have done this over the past few years in your previous book as well, right? How is the world understanding India? Are we relatable? How is the Global South? Global South is a key focus area for us. How is Global South responding to the Bharat? Instead of the India that was part of the solidarity movements of the previous century, we were colonies and we emerged together, Bandung Conference, a non-aligned movement. Now you have a Bharat that emerges. Is there continuity? And how do we make it relatable to these old friends of ours?
You know, I'm now giving you a universal proposition. I think if any society is sort of more sharply aware of its traditions, culture and heritage, it will really only evoke more
Curiosity
respect or curiosity from others who are similarly. I mean, you know, if I respect my culture, I will only look better at you if you do your own, you know. So I don't see that as a zero-sum game between India and the world. I think for the rest of the world, if people use metaphors and explanations and dress and language and whatever, and well-being practices, traditional medicine, music, I think it's overall tends to evoke a positive response, and I empirically tested it out during the G20. That, you know, the more you actually had G20 delegates go out to different parts of our country and see for themselves, you know, frankly, and see us in a, you know, for what we are. I mean, we may have our warts, we have our good side, the totality of it, I think they came away much better off. Where today the Global South is concerned, there are 2 parts to it. One is the Global South is actually in real distress because we have recovered from COVID. We should not extrapolate it onto other parts of the Global South. There are many societies and countries who have not. They've taken a really, I would say, a generational hit in terms of the impact of the COVID. So for them, in many ways, India is seen as a kind of a country with a large heart. I mean, that you took care of your own, you did within your means something for us. You know, when say G20 happened, you tried to get our issues on the table, you succeeded to a fair measure. So one is that. The other part is actually, when I go abroad, a lot of the conversations, people are genuinely curious about what's happening within the country. What we have done digitally, what we have done, I would say, in terms of space, in terms of telecom. So the progress of India, because look,
It's more contextual for them.
it's relatable. It's relatable. I mean, in fact, I remember President Ramaphosa actually saying it the day we landed on the moon.
The BRICS summit was on.
Yeah, when BRICS was going on.
Correct.
And his thing was, look, in fact, he joked with Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, saying, sit down next to me, some of your capabilities will rub off. And, I'm sure we too will make it. So I think they kind of, there's a
So this was not a distant, rich US sending a satellite to the moon. It was a more contemporary partner of theirs, a journeyman in a way.
I will not make a national comparison, but I will only speak for ourselves.
Okay. Very difficult, sir. Okay, let's turn to Vibhishan. And you have a fair bit on Vibhishan here. In fact, on first Vibhishan's convictions, and then Lord Rama's ability to trust him, courtesy the communication he had received from Hanuman. So, the whole network of how he was able to...
The assessment, yes.
The assessment of Hanuman, the trust of Ram, and the morality of Vibhishan. Now here is my question to you. Whose morality was Vibhishan representing or upholding at that particular point of time? In India itself, I don't think any parent names his child Vibhishan. I'm putting it bluntly, right? Vibhishan is a person who may have supported a righteous war, but he certainly is more complicated individual in that whole saga, in that whole epic, right? So in an informationized society like ours, and you've used the word information and narratives multiple times. In fact, I must, as an aside, tell you that I read a piece by Fareed Zakaria recently for Foreign Affairs or one of the publications, where he has actually taken on both Trump and Biden, and Trump more, Biden less, Biden gently, Trump more harshly, less gently, on they are talking down their country, they are pessimists and they are negative on that country. But even he is realizing the power of information and how it is changing the political landscape. So my question to you is, Vibhishan in another role or in another geography could be inimical to countries as well. In this particular epic, he may have served a purpose. But how do you deal with the morality of Vibhishan and the utility of Vibhishan in modern contemporary times? What is it that states need to do to in many ways, engage with these real developments? And actually it happens all the time.
Well, I did not address that issue because it was not relevant for my argument. The way I addressed it from two other facets. One was that Vibhishan, being Ravan's brother, who left him and went over to Lord Ram's side, he was a person who was actually situationally aware, who had a knowledge about many things which many others didn't. So the idea of fighting a knowledge-based war was very important, because were it not for him, at various times, the Ram and Lakshman were in serious danger. The other is actually the opposite of what you are saying, which is when he defects, the general body of opinion is actually hostile to him, saying, why are we welcoming somebody who's come over, and maybe he's not a genuine defector, which is where judgment came in, because it is Hanuman's judgment, which obviously Lord Ram has internalized, and he has his own judgment here, which makes him believe that, this man is a true believer. So I presented him more as an occasion for a judgment call, taking the right judgment, and really representing a factor where knowing the conditions in which you are fighting, knowing the problems which you have, and knowing, in a sense, where to find an answer, These are some of the aspects which he represents. I have stepped aside from that.
The morality argument, and you have looked at the utility of being empowered through information and through knowledge. Fair enough. Let me turn to the audience now, and I've already alerted a few people that I'm going to turn to them. Let me first turn to Ambassador Krishnamurthy, Ambassador of Indonesia to India. Pulkit, can you bring the mic to Ambassador? Go ahead.
Thank you. Such an honor to pose the first question. I'm so envious to Samirji because you have read the book. So I'm so looking forward to read the book. Excellency Minister, I think in writing a book, although as substantive as your book, the second book, also the first one, I'm curious about your creative process. You are a very busy man. You travel a lot. You go about with your business as minister and also politician. Where and how you get the time to get the inspiration? Is it in the washroom? Is it, you scribble somewhere and then put it in the black box, or record your voice, your own voice? How the creative process was? And if if I can summarize the book, it's actually bridging the past, the present, and future. If we're in a time machine, and you have a very long career as diplomats, anything that you want to change, reverse the time, you delete, or even make it better, if you are in a time machine, what is it? Thank you.
It's not so much in the washroom. But seriously, look, what happens is I also, and this is particularly so as a minister, as a politician, I have an opportunity to meet a lot of people, to talk with a lot of people, there's a back and forthing and interaction. So what happens is, when you go around, because I genuinely believe today that given the extent of how connected we have become, physically and otherwise, that it's impossible for people not to have an interest in the world. And I see that validated. I mean, people ask you the most extraordinary things and very surprising things, and sometimes very knowledgeable things. So given this changing world, you have more conversations. Somewhere you feel, okay, these are good ideas now. It starts you thinking. As I said, sometimes you say something, you are challenged, you go back and say, okay, I didn't think of it that way. So there's a dialectic process here. On the time machine, I wouldn't go into a time machine, but that what if chapter, I've called it the roads not taken. What were the roads India did not take? And I'm talking maybe the first decade of our independence. I think that might kind of answer your question.
But sir, do you know that you are kind of a internet cult figure now? You know that, right? Like you have glasses, those glasses with those blazing eyes, and there are emojis of yours. No, you can ask the students. It's not. They keep sending me emojis of yours. Okay. In fact, today they sent me. There is a theory that Dr. Jaishankar's day is much longer than 24 hours because he always travels towards the west and comes through that route back to India. So he can get very long days. So is that when you...
It's not untrue.
It's not untrue. Okay. Let me now turn to the second intervention from the audience, Ambassador of Norway, Ms. May Ellen Stenner.
Thank you very much, Samir, and Happy New Year, Minister. What a great way to start this new year, which will be my first full year as a Norwegian ambassador to India. And I also must say Bharat certainly matters to Norway. When you think of countries being different, you can maybe not think of two more different countries than Norway and India. You are big, we are small. We are up in the north, we are very cold, you are hot, talking about the climate. So there would be...
Thank you.
There are a lot of differences, but certainly we have also a few things in common. And I would say also on the basis of what you said, Minister, we both are countries who would like to be bridge builders, you said or you had those set of shocks you talked about in your first interventions. And in this world, you know, how are you concretely thinking about India being a mediator, India being a facilitator in bridging the world together and bridging the quite polarized world that we are in together? And firstly, a question about India's role here, but also how can you work with small countries like Norway and other countries around here?
You know, I somewhere in the book make this point because that refers to your last remark that today we have reached a situation where there is no country in the world that does not matter to us. And where Norway is concerned, I must also tell you, I've actually spoken about our engagement through the Nordic format because I have underlined today that if you look at India's relationship with the West, the effort and the energy invested in it is actually unparalleled. But you know, that's to repay your compliment. But can we mediate? Should we mediate? Look, it has happened from time to time in our past. It depends on the context. It depends on the situation. If I were to give you an example of the conflict in Ukraine, for example, there are, in some ways, we tried to contribute a bit, whatever was helpful from our side. When the grain corridor was being discussed, the Turks had some issues, so they spoke to us about it. We spoke to the Russians. Much more on the nuclear plant, where actually the Ukrainian PM, he spoke to me when I was in New York, and at that time, that's when actually there was shelling going on, and he wanted us to pass on some messages to the Russians. By the way, I had a conversation today with my Ukrainian counterpart as well. So I think sometimes it helps to be up in front. Sometimes it is better to not get in other people's way if somebody else is doing something. Like in many ways, the UN Secretary General is trying to address some parts of, the Ukraine, the conflict there. So, as a general approach, we would like to be helpful, and we'd like to be helpful in practical terms. That's why you have such a strong Indian history in peacekeeping operations, you know, because mediation is one side of it. I mean, on the ground very often, unless there is a force, what you have agreed to doesn't work out. So I think we play to our strengths in a way, and I think peacekeeping has been very much a part of that tradition.
But also, it's based on what I've read recently. First someone from your service, who shall not be named, said to me, no matter who fights in the world, we have to evacuate people. Because we are everywhere now. We have such a large constituency. So we have to now focus on building those capabilities. But I was also told by the same person that if you look at the countries that have benefited from the presence of our capabilities to evacuate from crisis zones, they run into 50 and 60 countries who have actually hitched a ride. And of course, we have also been beneficiaries of other capabilities. But is this something that we are focusing on?
You know, again, look, the size, I mean, a lot of things are driven by capabilities, a lot of things are driven by a big heart. We've had occasions, you know, it could be our immediate neighbors. I think Operation Ajay in Israel, I think there were some citizens of Nepal who came back. In the case of Operation Ganga in Ukraine, many more. I remember when there was an earthquake in Nepal many years ago, there were a lot of Spanish tourists who were trapped there. So I think if the general demeanor is,
Of partnerships.
be good with the world, do what you can, build bridges, make friends. So I have a chapter which is called Making Friends, Influencing People. It's not an original title, but I think it will give you a sense of what it is that Indian foreign policy is trying to do.
Can I request the mic to come to Ambassador Sujan Chenoy, please? Sir, behind you, yeah.
Congratulations, sir, on the launch of your splendid book. Clearly, the G20 presidency of India was a big success. The Delhi Declaration was adopted by consensus, and India also managed to put the developmental agenda center stage. How much of this would you attribute to Bharat tapping its ancient strategic wisdom and engaging the world, including potential Ravans, on new terms?
Okay, those concepts are yours. I will address the issue. I would say this, and I mean we both had the advantage in a way of looking at our country while living outside our country. It leads to a certain objectivity. I do think that we are a naturally confabulative culture, that it's in our nature, that if there is something in us, we don't instinctively, it's cultural, I think we don't bottle it up, we tend to talk. And what in a way it did was, it took the G20 summit in September was actually a conversation which had been happening since January. I mean, it took multiple rounds of conversations, largely on a given set of issues, to arrive at that point. And in that sense, yes, we were Bharat because partly we handled it in a very, I would say, almost a traditional, instinctive manner. But also we were Bharat because at various points of time we were subject to pressures of various kinds. And we didn't bend, and I must say here, there were other countries who also gave us strength at that time. So that sense of independence, that in a sense a certain self-belief, I think was also very, we kind of never doubted it would happen. And I think that made a lot of difference.
Let me turn to Sakshi Gayarekar, student at the Lady Shri Ram College. I want the mic to reach Sakshi. Sakshi, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Good evening, sir. Tomorrow is my birthday, and I think it's the best gift from...
Happy birthday.
Thank you, sir. And I think it's best gift from God that I got chance to ask question from you. And my question is, like, we know that 2024 is going to be the era of AI also. So how can we, and there are a lot of people who are fearful of missing their jobs. So how can we make AI our assistant instead of becoming assistant of AI? And other than that, what are your expectations from the youth of India, and how can they take India towards becoming Vishwaguru?
Okay, that's my next book. So, but if you look at the march of, do sit down. If you look at the march of technology, every time there's a sharp jump in technology, these fears are articulated. And what it happens is people, the marketplace, employment, the economy adjust to what are the new technologies in play. So I'm not quite sure that this proposition that somewhere, the robots will take over and we will, and I think there's a over-dramatization of that. But nevertheless, I think it's important that we wake up to the AI era, and the basic, in a sense, security issue which arises from an AI era is actually that of data. That, when you look at the data handling debate which is going on in this country, on the one hand there is the privacy of the person whose data has been generated. On the other hand, data is a business. So if you're making it easier to do business, you want it make it easier to handle data. And yet data is security, especially in an AI era. So how do you protect, so how this triangle of privacy, security, and business or economy, you can say, how do you arrive at the right landing point? And I think it's a big challenge. Europe has done it its way, China has done it its way, America has done it its way. I think these are some of the issues, but in terms of international relations, certainly for us, when we look at cross-border data flows, I think in an era of AI, it's important that there is that factor of trust which is built in it. That we have to ask ourselves, I would certainly like my personal data to be in the hands of another recipient who would give it the same degree of protection and respect that you'd get in your own society.
Okay, so I have two hands here, but there are lots of hands. I'm going to take only one question. Sorry, we've had. Okay, so we'll take two. So can we take two quick rapid fire questions? Okay, rapid fire. So I'll only send the mic to the two hands which are adjacent to each other there in the fourth row. Two hands adjacent to each other. We'll take both the questions. I'll try to remember them. Put it right behind you. Yeah, two hands there.
Though it's not my birthday, but I'm equally happy to ask the question. My question is to, sir, as you said, the economics and strategic concepts can't exist in isolation. So my question is related to BRICS expansion. Does it also correlate with the fact that geoeconomics and geopolitics has come on a same platform, and how much the BRICS expansion has been able to reconcile the West, that it is not anti-Western, but it's non-Western view?
Can I have the lady? Can you introduce yourself and ask the question, please? Go ahead. You wanted to ask, right? I'm not forcing you to ask.
No, I wanted
go ahead.
to. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Bring the mic close to you.
Okay. My name is Sagina, and I start with, it's a huge admiration moment for me, but due to brevity of time, I'll stick to my question. But before starting that, I would say, since we were saying Hanumanji used to forget his strength, and there is a mantra, Kavin Jokat Katin Jagmai Hone, and that mantra is our Honorable Minister for India. My question is, 2023 has been an year for India, and like you just shared, that we took some independent decisions through strategic diplomacy in the strategic times. So India, that is Bharat now, how do you see 2024 and especially this decade in terms of possibility of conflict in Taiwan? How can we use our impact to mitigate the impact, because somewhere now we are becoming key global player, and what repercussion global South and India could have. Thank you.
Two questions, sir. BRICS expansion, geopolitics meets geoeconomics, and and Taiwan.
Look, my point on the geopolitics and the geoeconomics, so let us say economics and strategy, is that we are no longer in an era, because of the technology, because of issues like data, various sensitive capabilities, where our economic choices can be different or opposed to our strategic choices. So we need to think of it, because historically in our policy making, that's not the way people have thought about it. That economic choices have been made relatively autonomously of the political connotations that accompany that choice. So they, I think, perforce, because of the kind of world we are moving into, they have to be more and more linked. And your question about about the BRICS, the BRICS, as you know, it is a very diverse grouping. What it shares is the fact that it's all non-West. Okay. Now, whether all are not anti-West, I don't know, but all are non-West. I can at least say for India that today we do make that distinction. We are non-West. That's a reality. It's not in our interest to be anti-West. The West is a very, very valuable partner. There are different domains in which we will benefit. There are different areas in which there are very strong convergences between us and Western countries. And if you look actually today at crucial indicators, if you are talking about foreign policy for the people, look at where your trade is, where your investments are coming and going, where is mobility, where is education, where is tourism. I think there are some very strong pointers out there. On the 2024 and any hypothetical situations are hypothetical. It's very hard to answer them because you actually do not know what reality would look like. But I do think that 2024 will continue to be turbulent, that many of the same factors which drove 2023 would remain very much in play. I think, as Sanjay also pointed out, there are going to be a lot of democratic events happening. In other countries, there could even be transitions. So I think all of that would feed into how we would look at it. But today, where we are positioned politically, where we are positioned economically, when you look at a lot of the societal changes and the capabilities that have grown, I would say, at the end of this conversation, I'm closer to saying we have strung the bow than perhaps I was being a bit bashful at the beginning. But I do think we have reached that point where we can really look at 2024, despite being a very turbulent year, with a fair deal of confidence.
Sir, if you'll permit me, one more question. One more. Okay. Can I ask the ambassador of Morocco to pose the question? He's been trying to get my attention, and I've been trying to ignore him, but I can't. He's sitting right in front of me. Go ahead, sir.
Can I go ahead, sir? Good evening. Thank you, Samir. Congratulations, Excellency, for the second book. I am sure that I will enjoy the second as I enjoyed the first one. I'll start from the title, Why Bharat Matters. It denotes a kind of pride of belonging. And it's very important. When we say the pride of belonging, means that there is something becoming from India big. In a sense that we feel that it's becoming big and also global player. In the geopolitical transformation that are happening, I'm sure that there is the ambition to lead in a certain way, either be at the spearhead of many countries or ideas or technology, whatever. In the case of India becoming a model, which I hope it will become a model, and then with the global South discussions and also voice that is becoming more apparent, my question would be, if you are a model, what would you advise the countries to follow? And what would you advise them not to follow, which India has done? Thank you so much.
Well, obviously, if I were to become a model, I would advise people to follow the model and not follow other models. But more seriously, I would put it more in terms of what have we managed to do which makes sense, or which is in the need, which is in demand in the rest of the world. And if we have done something, as I said, space, digital, health, I can give you innumerable examples. And again, I'm not suggesting it would apply in every domain. There'd be domains where, frankly, we'd be looking at a large part of foreign policy, and I've spelt it out at length, is when we travel out, we also go looking out for best practices. We look at, people who have faster trains, who have maybe better airports, or who have some, infrastructure which is impressive. So a lot of world of the world is going to be interactive in that way, but I certainly believe that especially the digital domain is a domain where we can be an exemplar, that we can do things with an efficiency, on a scale, at a cost, with an impact, which probably nobody else can match. And I think that is something, I mean, if I look at the next 10 years and say which domain would we be most impactful, I would, with a fair degree of confidence, predict that it would be in the digital domain.
I think that's a good note to end this conversation, and I'm sorry, we cannot take more questions. We are seriously 30 minutes over time. I promised to leave the minister by 8 p.m. And generally, we do adhere to time. It's an urban legend or urban myth that we are late and not punctual. 30 minutes is not being late, okay? So let me thank you all for participating. Let me thank the publisher for bringing this blockbuster out. You probably have time between now and when he sits in his car to sign the next book that he has promised he's going to be writing to the young person. Kapish, you can do that. Let me thank everyone else who has contributed to this evening, including the team at ORF who put this together in a short time over New Year's, and of course to the young students who have braved the Delhi cold and joined us this evening. But most of all, let me thank the Foreign Minister for his service to India, for his service to Bharat, and for inspiring all of us to engage with matters that should include everyone on the street. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. And a happy new year to all of you.